This is one of the days covering the Eagles I enjoy more than maybe any other. We get a half hour with the head coach, and we get to talk to owner Jeffrey Lurie.
Yeah, most likely the only time he'll talk in 2024. Unless he shows up at training camp one day and feels chatty, but that hasn't happened in the last few years. So we'll see. But yeah, it's a good day. It's a day to learn a lot about what the front office and coaching staff is thinking.
Yeah, so a day after talking to Howie Roseman down here, got a chance to talk to Nick Sirianni and Jeff Lurie at the owners' meetings in Orlando. This is the Eagle Eye Podcast presented by Nissan. He's Ruben Frank. I'm Dave Zangaro. Rube, we have a lot to get into. I don't want to waste too much time with small talk, but
we never do that.
But I did want to tell you I'm indoors for this podcast because it is way too hot outside. And I don't know if you can see this, but I definitely have a little sunburn going.
Yeah, not getting any sunburn up here. It's about 48 in Philly. A little breezy, but I'm sure it'll welcome you back. I honestly, I'd rather have this weather than 85. And is it a muggy 85? That kind of Central Florida?
Not too bad.
Okay. Yeah. Enough small talk.
Yeah, that's enough small talk. Let's get into the meat of the day. Jeffrey Lurie spoke for just under 40 minutes. I believe quite a long time. He is a long-winded individual, so
he wasn't that bad today, I thought.
He wasn't that bad. There were certainly some long-winded answers, but we needed answers to some major questions, and I think at the forefront of everyone's mind, even though it's been over a couple months already since we knew that Nick Sirianni was coming back, that was still the biggest question to be answered. After the collapse of the 2023 season, I was there in Tampa watching Jeff Lurie walk in the tunnel back from the field to the locker room, and he looked like a man who was ready to fire his head coach. Didn't happen. Obviously, a bunch of changes on the coaching staff, but Nick Sirianni stays. And today we finally got to ask Jeff why.
Yeah, and he was certainly ready for the question and prepared for it. And, I guess the basic gist of it was he's always evaluating everybody after every season, but with Nick, he's evaluating the body of work and not just the last 7 weeks. Now, my response to that would be, well, in '94, he fired Cote after he lost his last 7 games, after making the playoffs 2 years earlier, and winning a playoff game. But that's beside the point. He basically said, I don't just look at the last 6 games. I look at everything. And we were 31-7 leading up to that, through the second half of 21 and all of 22 and the first half of 23, first 11 games, which is true. And I'm sure that had that's the way his mind works. He's not going to let 6 weeks, 7 weeks kind of, even as bad as it was, he's not going to let that, take it out of context, I guess, in his mind, which you couldn't blame him if he did, certainly. But his point was, I'm looking at the body of work, and he's had a very good one and been in the playoffs all 3 years and all that. So he pretty much said what we figured he'd say, but it was good to hear him say it.
Yeah, as far as this stuff goes, he mentioned not wanting to let recency bias dictate the decision.
Now, and latency bias.
And latency bias, correct. I could argue that the way you end a season is pretty darn important, maybe more important than how you start it. So you could certainly push back against that. But I do think it is wise to not make any move out of pure emotion. I think that's something we can trust that Jeffrey won't do.
Yeah.
Aside from maybe Chip, but I think there was plenty of real reasons to fire Chip. I think it was wise to kind of take a step back, really figure out what happened, what's going to happen going forward. And a big part of it was Nick's complete body of work, but another big part of it was the plan going forward.
Yeah. And I'm sure, Nick had to go in there and sell Jeff Lurie on his plan with the coaching staff and just how he was going to turn this thing around. And more than just the coaching staff, everything, the roster, I'm sure everything played into it. But I know the coordinators, we know that was a huge part of it. And Jeff Lurie kind of scoffed at the notion that he was picking the coordinators, but he did kind of say, not so many words, but they had to be 2 guys that met his expectations and met his criteria, and they did. And he seemed really happy with both of them. Vic and Kellen. So, we'll see. But I mean, they're certainly two guys with, with good resumes, good solid resumes. Obviously, Vic's is longer, and I'm sure those are the kind of names that Jeff Lurie wanted to hear, and I'm sure that was a huge part of it.
Yeah, I think that's massive, and it makes me think back to 2020 because that's the clear difference between this situation and the one with Doug Peterson back in 2020. Jeff Lurie did not like Doug's answers that year, right? You remember it was, let's run it back with Press Taylor. Matt Burke moves up to be the defensive coordinator, and Jeffrey went, whoa, that's not good enough. We have to think outside the box here. And it was one of the main reasons we believe that he ended up firing Doug and moving on. Nick took some big swings at coordinators. And I know Jeffrey said he didn't pick these guys, but I think it's notable that, if I'm Nick and I'm trying to think about how to save my job, these are coordinators that make sense. Vic has already been in the building. Jeffrey is clearly on board with that defensive strategy. It's a strategy they've tried to implement with the past two defensive coordinators. So, and Vic already kind of knows the build. So we know that would be good with Jeff Lurie. And then Kellen Moore is someone we know Jeffrey has thought highly of because he interviewed him for a head coaching job a few years ago. So if I'm Nick and I'm thinking, what kind of plan will be appealing to my boss? He came up with one.
Yeah, and I also think it illustrates the differences between Doug and Nick. I mean, I think Doug felt very empowered because he just won a Super Bowl a couple of years ago, and Nick got to one but didn't win it. And I think their personalities are just different. Doug was going to be like, no, it's going to be my way. I'll get a job somewhere else. I'll take a year off and I'll get a job in Jacksonville. Whereas Nick, he's just not wired that way. And I'm not saying one is better than the other as far as that goes, but they definitely have a different approach. I just can't see Doug sitting there saying, all right, who's Mr. Lurie going to really, approve of if I pick him? Doug's going to say, these are my guys, take it or leave it. And we saw what happened. And I appreciate both methods. I'm not sure there's a right or a wrong. Nick sits down and says, I really want to keep my job. What's the best way to do it? Kellen Moore, like you said, knows him. Vic Fangio knows him, respects him. Those are my guys. Oh, yeah. Yeah. You can keep your job.
Yeah. Good ideas, Nick.
So, look, and they're
hey, we all do things to keep our jobs, right? Like I do this podcast to keep my job. I don't want to talk to you multiple times a week, but here I am, right?
I guess that's fair. But I also think it's not like, Nick had to select guys that aren't capable to satisfy Jeff Lurie. They're both really highly regarded, successful coordinators. So it's not like he was just playing the game. He was playing the game, but also coming up with big upgrades on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, and Jeffrey has talked about Nick's humility before, and I think that kind of plays a role here. Like, a guy with too much ego wouldn't be able to do this. And I'm not saying it's the right or wrong thing to do, but Jeffrey has praised that humility from Nick before when you think back to the 21 season when he relieved himself of play calling duties. So I think that's important. And Jeffrey also kind of laid out, and he's done this before, but he laid out that he wants his head coach to really be a manager. And he made it a point to say that he's never hired a head coach because of play calling acumen or history. It's not the most important part of the job. And we know Nick wasn't calling plays the last couple of years, but I think it's fair to say he had a bigger imprint on the offense than we expect this year.
Yeah, it was funny to hear him. I thought that was a really interesting passage in his presentation. He said, the only coach I've ever hired that had a history calling plays was Chip Kelly. And that was at Oregon. That was really interesting to me. Andy had never done it in Green Bay. Obviously, Ray Rhodes was a defensive coach. He never did it.
Doug had done a little bit, like situation.
Yeah. I mean, Andy would let him do like a series, or if they were up 30, he'd let him call like the fourth quarter or something. But he hadn't really done a ton of it. So yeah, he said that's not why he hires a coach. I thought that was really interesting, and I think he was being honest there. He listed
I agree.
all the more important things to him. He's like, as long as there's somebody on staff who's good at calling plays. I mean, heck, Shane got him into the Super Bowl with his play calling. Certainly wasn't a handicap that Nick wasn't calling the play. So I thought that was a really good point. It's something I hadn't really considered.
And he also mentioned it's a little proprietary because they have been so good at hiring coaches. He probably doesn't want to divulge all of his thoughts on the process.
I'm sure he doesn't. I mean, he's been really incredible at it when you think about it. I mean, even Ray Rhodes was coach of the year his second year. Obviously, Andy's a Hall of Famer. Chip was coach of the year his first year. I mean, Chip took a team that was really, really bad Andy's last year and got to the playoffs. And then obviously Doug won a Super Bowl and Nick got to one. So he's got a great track record, and I don't blame him if he doesn't want to give away his secrets. But he did mention that, which is something I had never considered.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was pretty important. Anything else on Nick or that part of it from Jeffrey? Because there were a bunch of other takeaways we want to get to.
He was just asked about, is he on the hot seat going into next year? There's perception that he's on the hot seat because of the way last year ended. And his answer is basically every coach is always on the hot seat. There's pressure on every coach. And I don't think that's completely accurate because like Bill Belichick wasn't going to get fired 10 years ago. But even 6 Super Bowls wasn't enough for him to keep his job this year. So it's true.
What did you make of that answer though? Because he could have said, we really have faith in Nick. We trust in him. Is that just Lurie kind of not wanting to back himself into a corner? Because he knows that, I think we all realize the stakes are pretty high. You've already fired both coordinators. There's not much else to do if this doesn't work.
No, just Michael Clay. But
who got a nice little shout out in this.
He did. And he made a really good point about it. We'll get to that. But no, I think that was intentional. I think, I mean, he's basically saying, he's on the hot seat. Won one game the last 2 months. Got blown out 3 times, blew 3 big leads. I mean, yeah. Yeah, and obviously he should be on the hot seat.
Well, sure. I mean, like I mentioned, there's nothing else to do if this doesn't work. This is kind of like a last ditch effort to make the Sirianni era continue.
Yeah, we went 6-11, but we're going to fire the ticket manager and the marketing director. That's about all that's left.
Yeah, pretty much. He did talk about the collapse a little bit. I thought his comments on that went a little farther than Nick or Howie have gone since the end of the season. He talked about the 49ers and the Chiefs and how, they had a rough patch in their seasons too, but they figured it out. They were able to pull themselves out of it, and that's what good teams do. The Eagles were not, and he said that he didn't get into the findings of their studies, but he talked about that was a big part of their, kind of after the season look back to figure out what the heck happened, because the good teams, he's right, figure out a way to get through rough patches.
Yeah, I mean, the Niners had those 3 straight losses, and the Chiefs at one point, I think, lost 4 out of 6 games or something. So I thought that was really interesting. What was the difference between the Eagles and the Chiefs and Niners? Why couldn't they, rebound like he talked about? He didn't get into that. I'd love to know his thoughts on it. I just don't think they were good enough. I think they just didn't have enough good players, and they had players that really didn't believe in anything. They were just kind of picking up a paycheck. I think that was a big part of it. Now, some of that was injury. Some of that was Howie just signing the wrong guys. Some of it just guys who had been good just weren't good anymore, and especially on defense. And you put it all together, and 2 coordinators who were really struggling to make adjustments, really 3 of them. He was very complimentary of Matt Patricia. Didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I kind of appreciated that answer because Yeah, it just didn't work. But he did mention that he kind of appreciated Nick's swing at it.
Yeah, I was expecting more of an answer like, well, Coach Patricia's he's won 3 Super Bowls. He's had a very good career on both sides of the ball. It just didn't work out here. We wish him, but he just didn't work. It was great.
Yeah, but he mentioned, I think Jeffrey appreciates big swings sometimes, as long as they're somewhat calculated. Now, this one, maybe there was a miscalculation because they gave Matt Patricia the freaking play sheet, but I think he appreciates the boldness. He appreciates it in Howie. I think he appreciates it in Nick, that he was willing to try that.
Yeah, if I'm Matt Patricia, I'm not asking Jeff Lurie for a reference for my next job.
Yeah, look, obviously a disaster and a poor decision on Nick's part because things got much worse. But I think it speaks to Jeffrey, though, that he liked the attempt.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point you made about Jeff likes big swings. And you can go back to, acquiring T.O., hiring Chip. All these, they're like, wow. Going out and getting AJ. There's been, every team signs big free agents, but it's like creative big swings too. They've never been afraid to go for it, I guess is the phrase.
Yeah, and we've seen that from they're not risk averse, as Jeff likes to throw in one of his Lurie phrases. He says that a lot, and I think
yeah, they're not risk averse, and they don't believe in latency bias.
All right. Other takeaways from Lurie's presser. He did talk about the personalities of Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts, and I think these are kind of fun to piece together because they're on either end of the spectrum in terms of over-the-top craziness. Jalen, very subdued. Nick, obviously not. But Jeffrey said he wants these guys to be themselves. He did offer that, with Nick, there are moments where we want him to rein it in, especially when it comes to the officials and making sure that we still get calls, which I get his perspective on that.
Yeah.
What did you make of both of what he said about both of those people?
The thing that struck me was that he wants Jalen to stay exactly the same, exactly the way he is. We don't want our 25-year-old superstar quarterback who was the MVP favorite halfway through, or 14 weeks into last season, and we don't want to change him. We want him being authentic. He's the word authentic a lot today. We want him being himself. His personality certainly wasn't a problem when we weren't losing, when we were going 34-7. But with Nick, he's like, he's got to I like the passion, I like the enthusiasm, but he's also got to be smart about it. And we don't want him to lose that. But if it's having an adverse effect on the product, then he's got to be more careful. So I thought that was interesting how he didn't hint at Jalen changing at all. He loves Jalen exactly the way he is, but Nick's got to rein it in a little bit. And I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think you could ask for Jalen to tune it up a little bit, but I think it's easier to rein it in than it is to turn it up.
I also think it's a little dangerous because the times that you want to see Jalen kind of get juiced up, we're not always privy to those moments in the locker room, the clubhouse, and the meeting rooms.
That's fair. And we do see it on occasion, like him breaking down the huddle. We've seen clips of that. So you're right. I think on the sideline, he doesn't do it a ton. And we know the camera's always trained on him. So I think in moments, it probably looks bad, but it really isn't.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. And we've seen some of those videos the Eagles send out after they win, those locker room videos. We've seen them get pretty vocal, pretty loud, pretty emotional. I really don't think it's a problem. It's really hard for me to look at the product and what he's done so far in his brief career, and then just say, well, he wasn't emotional enough once they started losing. Now, maybe you do have to change your personality a little when the team's losing to try to snap him out of it. But I think there's something to be said for that consistency. Guys around him know what they're going to get. I think he's fine the way he is.
Yeah, I kind of agree.
I think Nick's a little much sometimes.
Even Nick has admitted that.
Yeah, he has.
Yeah, he knows it. And there are moments where I think you do worry it's going to hurt the team.
Yeah. And it gets the other team. Maybe that doesn't really manifest itself in the game, but I mean, players on other teams hate him. Like he's making faces at them and, mugging into the camera. And yeah, you gotta be careful with that stuff.
A little bit. Rube, another interesting thing that was asked to Jeffrey Lurie was about Saquon Barkley, because we know that obviously Jeffrey has this vision of offensive football, and he really, really wants it to be a passing attack. He thinks that's the way to do this in the league. So what do you make of those two things meshing together? I think he said it best. It really comes down to, how do they rate him in the passing offense, but also the market inefficiencies that they found.
Yeah, and Howie alluded to that the other day, just that if his price comes down to a certain point, then now it is a good deal. And that's fair. And, it's not, in the big picture, it's not a huge deal. It's a huge deal for running backs, but and they keep calling him a weapon. It's like they're trying to kind of, paint him as an offensive weapon and not a running back. And I think you have to look at it that way, because this contract probably wouldn't be a good one if he's not really prominent in the passing game. And we talked about this. I mean, he's a guy that's caught 91 balls in a season. It was 4 years ago or 6 years ago, but he has to be. This is not a good contract if he's a guy that doesn't catch the football. It's that simple, and they know it. And I think that's a big part of, Kellen Moore, they threw to the backs in Dallas, and I think they're going to have to do it. And I think they know that. I think he's going to make this a better offense.
Yeah, and we talked about it a little bit on the last pod, but if they were going to upgrade one of the positions, like this has the ability to have the greatest impact, right? More than wide receiver 3, more than tight end 2. The other 3 are solidified. This was the one area where I think they could improve from last year to this year the most, and they took a swing at it.
Yeah, like we talked about, big swings. I'm really intrigued to see how it goes. There are valid reasons to be skeptical, because when you look at his career arc, it's kind of a roller coaster. But when he's right and when he's healthy, and Jeff Lurie even mentioned he's going to have better O-line, better weapons around him, better quarterback. I don't think he mentioned coaches, but he all but did. He was very specific about how this will be a better situation for Saquon, which I thought was, he doesn't really get that specific. He's taking shots at Daniel Jones there, which was pretty cool. But those are all fair points, and those are all reasons to believe that it'll go well for him. Still a risky move.
Oh, sure. And I think they know that. But the market inefficiency thing is just such Howie and Jeffrey speak.
Yeah.
And it's the way they look at this. And I think they're trying to win on the margins wherever they can. And I think smart teams do that. And he even kind of mentioned it with the coordinators. It wasn't even the question, but he's like, I thought you were going to ask me how much we pay the coordinators, because we really do pay the coordinators quite a bit. I thought that was funny because it's true. There's no salary cap for coaches. So if you're trying to gain an advantage and you have an owner with deep pockets willing to throw the money at it, and even the way they structure contracts, that's winning on the margins, because you have to have ownership who's willing to foot the bill immediately.
Right. And I don't think any owner is not in good enough financial shape to pay coordinators top dollar. It's like in the big picture, when you look at TV revenue, coordinator salaries are dropping the bucket. But I think it's a good point. They're trying to do everything they can to, if you gain a small advantage in 20 different places, it's going to add up to a big advantage. And that's the way to look at it. And, people forever since how he got here have criticized him for being, having this banker's mentality or whatever. But has very real benefits. When you look at the cap, when you look at just roster management and being smart about money, he's pioneered some of these things. Joe Banner kind of got him started in it, but he's as good as anybody that's ever done it when it comes to the kind of, I guess, marrying the financial and the roster together. He's been great at it.
A few other takeaways from the Lurie presser. He talked about the Brazil game. Very proud, he said, to be the first host of a game in South America. We don't know who they're going to play. Apparently, it's coming down to the Packers or the Browns. We'll find out next week, but that's not that far away.
No, it's not. I know you got your passport all ready to go, sitting on the counter so you don't lose it on the way down there. Or before you go, whatever. But yeah, he said something interesting. He said, I know a lot of fans are upset because the Eagles are losing a home game, but they're going to rotate every team into an international game. So, I guess at some point every team, it might take a long time, but every team's going to lose a home game, lose a road game. It'll be equitable in the big picture, but yeah, and I don't know how it works with revenue. I assume they still get the same share of revenue. They just don't get parking, whatever. I don't know how all that works. Yeah, I think it's really fun. I know a lot of fans aren't real happy about it. And we talked about this the other day. Just it's a long flight. They're going down there, and they're not going to be down there very long, and they're coming back, and presumably they won't play for 9-10 days. But it's a lot on the body to be on an airplane that long and twice in that short of time.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because the NFL is such a big brand in the States, and American football is so big here. But you look worldwide, it's starting to get there. And I don't even know if this, in the long term, it's going to make the NFL money. The NFL is not getting out of bed for anything if it's not going to make them money. But I do think the more intriguing part of this is growing the sport worldwide. And I'm curious to see if that happens over the next decade or so.
Yeah. It hasn't really happened in England. They've been playing in England forever. I remember going over there for preseason games in 89 and 91. They have leagues there, but they're just kind of like semi-pro leagues. I wonder how much of it is, the Jaguars go over there every year and they sell $1 billion of Jaguars gear in England. So maybe part of the thinking is, what's the population of Brazil? Probably like 300 million.
It's the 5th biggest country population-wise in the world, according to Jeff Lurie.
He did say that.
I can look that up. Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't you look that up?
Yeah, I am. So
if you have that many people and they fall in love with the Eagles jerseys and buy $1 billion of jerseys, I guess there's some benefit there. And you develop a brand, you widen your footprint, as they say. What do you got?
This has it at 6th.
Yep. I think India, People's Republic of China, U.S. Who else is ahead of?
According to this, which I don't, China, India, U.S., Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil. So
yeah, I think Pakistan just passed Brazil since Lurie's presser ended.
Okay, congratulations to Pakistan.
Yeah, they're finishing strong, unlike the Eagles. They're moving up.
Other takeaways from Lurie's presser?
Yeah, I think we covered the main things. Yeah, I thought he was pretty good today. I
thought it was good. He mentioned he was asked about Isaiah Rodgers.
Right.
Didn't really have an update there, but they're hoping to have him. He said Rodgers does figure into their plans, which is
he said very soon. He expects him to be cleared very soon.
Yeah, so we'll see. Hopefully, we get an update on that very soon because OTAs are around the corner. He was asked about the NFLPA poll and acknowledged that the results in that poll last year led to changes, which worked. They went from 14th to 4th overall in that poll. I know travel was like the big area they improved, and I know they just bumped up one letter grade, but the Eagles really did make a concerted effort to listen to that survey and try to improve for their players.
He talked for a minute about the rule change, the kickoff, which we'll get into later, but he's very, very positive about it. And I think he called the kickoff a dead play. It's like we're reviving a dead play. And he talked about how much he appreciates the NFL's willingness to make a change immediately, like not study it for 6 years, but hey, this isn't working. Let's do this. Okay. And the owners voted for it.
I asked him about the proposed proposed plans for the sports complex in South Philly. Said they're monitoring it. They're not involved in any way yet, but they live down there basically, so they're keeping an eye on it. Curious to see if they ever join in any way.
He did mention, it was kind of odd in that answer, that we have our lease for 9 more years.
I clocked that too.
What's that all about?
Well, we've talked for a long time that the NovaCare complex, they've outgrown it in a lot of ways. And I don't know. I mean, it's so convenient right now because their facility is so close to the stadium. But part of me wonders if down the line, if they can't manufacture more space there, if they wouldn't consider moving.
No, it wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, I don't know. I need to look into that parking lot, the world's biggest parking lot, which is right next to the NovaCare. It's rarely used. It's like Phillies overflow. When there's something at that Roosevelt Park across the street, like they had the flower show there. Broad Street Run ends there, and they use it there. But you see it full, like maybe 10 days, 20 days a year. You would think they'd want to get a chunk of that. I mean, the bubble is inadequate. Their indoor facility is really inadequate. And I think these are things that, they've got to think about. And these are questions that if Jeff Lurie spoke more than once a year, he would get asked. I really thought that you guys, how many Philly guys are there? About 12?
Yeah, about that.
I thought everyone asked good questions and the right questions today. So that was, I thought he was asked pretty much every relevant, important question.
That's good. It's daunting because you get them once a year. So you got to wait 12 months to ask anything you forgot in this one. The last note I had from Lurie was he did talk about Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelce. Said no plans yet to honor them, but they're planning to honor them. They're going to do it in some way. And he talked about how proud he is to have these guys, and he included BG in this as well. He expects them to be a part of the franchise going forward, even when they're not playing.
Yeah. And I think that's something that out of all of Jeff Lurie's changes that he made when he bought the team from Norman Brayman, maybe the most striking one is, and there's a lot, but just how much he's embraced and embraces the history of the franchise. It's something that Norman Brayman, there was no Eagles Hall of Fame. There's some rusty plaques in the vet on the first floor that you couldn't even read, for like a little picture of, Tommy Thompson or something. But, you walk into like the Head House Plaza now, and the presentation's incredible. While fans are waiting to go to their seats before the gates open, it's like a little museum in there. The way they have former players at halftime, they have alumni days. There's always like 5 or 6 former players at training camp each day. It's really cool how he's connected the past. I asked him about it once back when we did talk to him more than once a year. And he said, this franchise goes back to 1933. So why wouldn't we want it? And even the stuff in the NovaCare that most fans don't get to see, but there's all kinds of historical markers about important games in the 40s and 50s and 60s and on. It's really cool. And it makes guys like Fletch and Kelce want to be a part of it. It's since he bought the team 25 years, 30 years ago now, it's been a franchise that acknowledges its past and celebrates it. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's take a break. We have a lot more on the other side.
You deserve a car that thrills you, a car that puts goosebumps on your goosebumps. At Nissan, we got everything from turbocharged SUVs to 100% electric vehicles that'll make your heart beat faster. Experience the thrill for yourself and shop your local Nissan store at nissanusa.com today.
Celebrity cook Steve Martorano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martorano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations at Martorano's Prime on Open Table. All right, Rue, we talked about Jeff Lurie for a while. Nick Sirianni, a half-hour breakfast with reporters, 7:45 a.m. An hour before this breakfast started, all of the seats around Nick Sirianni's spot completely full.
Really? What time did they open the door? What time did they let you in?
I don't know. It was open when I got there. I got a seat. Competitive to get those seats. Not that way in other markets.
Who had the fewest people around them?
Might have been Jonathan Gannon. Long trip from Arizona, not a huge beat core to begin with.
Yeah. Interesting.
At least at the NFC day. Yeah.
So what were your biggest takeaways from Nick?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Saquon a little bit earlier from Jeff Lurie's perspective, but I found it interesting that Sirianni talked about A.J. Brown when he was explaining how they're going to figure out how to use Saquon. He said, a couple years ago when they got A.J., they really did like a deep case study into A.J. Brown and the ways he was most effectively used in Tennessee, and they're starting to do that with Saquon because when you have an elite player like that, it's not good enough to just run the plays you have and hope he fits them. Like, he's going to be good, but you want to try to maximize his talent. And I think that's an important part of this process because he does have kind of a unique skill set.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. And I think that's very forward thinking. And, maybe every team does that kind of thing. But I think a lot of teams would be like, hey, look, this guy, we just throw him into our offense and he'll run for 1,200 yards. Maybe he would. But I think with a talent like that, you want to maximize him. And there's no better way than kind of really studying what he's good at and what he likes to do and what he's been most successful at. And they got time to do it. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that'll be fun to see, like, exactly how they use him and how innovative it's going to be. The tricky thing here is you're not even projecting him in the offense from last year because that offense doesn't exist as it was. It's going to be some kind of a hybrid between what Nick Sirianni's done, what Kellen Moore's done. And again, a lot of the questions to Nick were about the meshing of systems. And I think those are also really valid questions. And he didn't want to get into too much of it, the old competitive advantage.
Yeah, that was a shock because I thought he'd really open up about it. I think his answer was, you guys will see when we get to Brazil, which I'm not sure I've ever heard that kind of quote before. But, look, there's things he can say, and there's things that we'll see in training camp. We'll get a sense of, what this is. But, look, they're going to throw the ball. They're going to throw the ball to the backs. I think he just didn't want to say that. But, I think that's going to be – and what was the biggest problem with Brian Johnson as OC? It got stale. I think that was Nick's own words when the first time we talked to him after they fired him. It got stale. It got predictable. And I think that's as much Nick's fault as Brian Johnson's fault.
Perhaps more. I think more.
That's fair. And I think that's going to be a big focus on this coming year with the offense is every week you've got to reinvent what you're doing and not be predictable. And, if you're really, really good at something, do it and then do something else and surprise people. You can't just keep doing the same thing. So I think that's going to be a big part of it. But as far as specifically what those plays are going to look like, we'll see. But it's a tricky thing. I don't think it's and they're already working on it, he said, but I don't think it's a real I don't know, seamless thing to marry two different offenses. But that's what they're working on.
Yeah, and that was kind of the basis of my questioning to him was like, what's the actual process? Like, what are you guys doing to figure this out? And he basically said, like, they're going through a bunch of tape right now and looking at both offenses, finding the plays they think make the most sense, and then the plays they think make the most sense together. I asked him about terminology because I think that's an interesting wrinkle to this. Are they going to keep a lot of the terminology they used last year, or are they going to let Kellen kind of come in and dictate that? And that was when he shut down and said, you'll find out in Brazil, because I think that probably would be a relatively big hint to what this thing's going to look like.
Yeah, we'll find out on day one of training camp when we ask somebody. But yeah, I think those are all, and he might not even have an answer for some of these things yet. But you know, you're also marrying these two systems. You're also bringing in new personnel, so it's a complicated procedure to do that, I would think. But they have a lot of time.
Yeah, but you have to do it simultaneously, which is the tricky part.
Yeah.
Other stuff, the O-line depth and the O-line in general. I found some of his comments
curious,
worth mentioning here. Yeah. What'd you make of some of it?
Well, he wouldn't say Cam Jurgens is a starting center. I don't have to make this decision for a long time, which is true. When they drafted him, they said he's Jason Kelce's heir apparent. That was 2 years ago. They didn't have Matt Hennessy then. They didn't have other options then. I'm really curious to see what will happen. This could be just Nick playing that competitive advantage game, and they've already decided Cam Jurgens will get the first crack at center. I think that's most Or maybe they've got some doubts and maybe they want some competition there. You know, look, Matt Hennessy's played more center than Cam Jurgens, and Cam Jurgens played more guard than Matt Hennessy. So, you know, who knows? Who knows how it'll play out? Maybe Cam Jurgens stays at right guard and Matt Hennessy's your starting center. Maybe Landon Dickerson starts at center. Matt Hennessy's your left guard. Maybe Tyler Steen's your right guard. There's a lot of possibilities.
There are possibilities. My inkling on Nick about Cam Jurgens is that's just him playing this game that he likes to play. I'd be very surprised if Cam Jurgens is not the center the first time we see this offense on a football field.
Same. I agree.
Okay.
But
now
it's not 100% either. And he might be taking the reps with the ones, and maybe Hennessy gets a day with the ones, and just to kind of see. I mean, he does like competition. That could be competition that's decided before they start, but.
And he likes competition, but there was no competition for right guard last year.
No, that's true.
It was Cam Jurgens, and that's not his natural position.
Right.
That was Cam coming off a redshirt year, and they plugged him in a right guard and said, "Oh, go ahead." Now, I know center is a different position because of the protections, and there's a lot more on your plate. But if they were willing to just plug and play Cam at right guard, I don't understand why a year later they wouldn't be willing to do that at his more natural position with the year of experience in the NFL under his belt.
That's all fair. That's all fair. There's just that little bit of doubt in my mind. I mean, they did go out and sign an interior lineman that has starting experience, started 17 games at center for the Falcons 1 year. So we'll see.
And I mean, it's worth noting they lost depth too. They lost Sua Opeta and Jack Driscoll, so they had to replenish that
right
either way.
But they replenished it with a guy who started games at center. Just makes it a little more interesting. Look, I agree with you. I just think it's just interesting to me the way he handled it. And if you're really that worried about who they're really going to open with the Browns knowing who your center is in March, I just don't get that. Like,
he's done a lot more for a lot less.
That's probably true. I think Jim Schwartz probably will know before we know.
I like that you think it's the Browns.
It's just 50% chance I'm right.
The other part of it was Tyler Steen.
Yeah.
That to me was a little more curious than the Cam Jurgens answer, to be honest. He kind of left Tyler Steen out when he was talking about the guard spot a little bit.
Yeah, and then he started talking. He was asked specifically after that about him, right?
Yeah.
And he said, he's. I can look up. I can't remember exactly. It was just very non-committal, and say, there's a reason we drafted him in the third round. And as he talked about him, I think he kind of sensed that it sounded like a lukewarm endorsement of Tyler Steen, and he got a little stronger. There's a reason we drafted him in the third round, and but yeah, it was. And look, he started one game and he was okay. I thought he didn't really play much other than that. He started the game at right guard, but he certainly wasn't a rousing endorsement.
Yeah, and look, they started Sua over him last year, and Sua has experience, but you drafted a guy in the third round. If they were equal, my guess is that they would play the younger player.
Yeah,
who wasn't on an expiring contract.
Yeah, you would think so. And if they like Sua more than Tyler Steen, and they just let Sua go, without, then you want. Now, look, we know that they are really reluctant to play young guys, rookies. They'd rather play a veteran. Maybe in year two that'll change. His status will change. But they've done it with a lot of guys. They'll play a medium veteran, mid-veteran over a promising rookie just to kind of protect them or bring them along slowly. Seems to be one of Nick's things, although he's denied it. I asked him specifically about it, and he said, "No, we play rookies, but not that many."
Yeah, and I think sometimes to their detriment. Even though we're off topic, but I think sometimes there's value in playing younger players.
I think we all wanted to see a little bit of Kobe his rookie year, more than 37 snaps or whatever he played. I'm sure you know the exact number, 34, 37. What was it?
I don't know.
Oh, wow. But again, you're in a Super Bowl run. You got Kaiser and TJ Edwards, so I get that. But there was times you could have gotten him some more run.
34.
Oh.
Yeah.
Look at me. Maybe I'll ask Alex to cut out the part where I said 37. But then you'd have to cut out that.
Other stuff from Sirianni mentioned that Vic Fangio has autonomy over the defense, which we kind of knew. Like, why would you bring in Vic if he didn't have that?
He seemed a little surprised at the question. He's like, he's a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, but he did speak to the experience and how it's different than Gannon or Desai, who he said were, I liked his phrasing, were both first time coordinator-ish, because Desai had been a coordinator for one season earlier in his career. So, but it's true. The disparity in experience, it's kind of a little funny in a way that the year Nick might not have as much responsibility on offense, he doesn't need to have as much overseeing power on defense. It's like,
I did like the fact that he went out of his way without being asked to say, look, everything that happens on the field is on me. He showed some accountability. He's like, I'm responsible for everything you see on the field on both sides of the ball. It's got my name on it. And I like that. I like that accountability.
Yeah, you need to have it.
That's one of his core values, accountability. I don't know if you knew that.
I think I've heard that somewhere. There's 5 of those core values.
When he says his core values now, he says them so fast, you don't even know what he's saying, because he's like, it's just so like.
I'd like to fast forward. You're like, Nick, no. There were a few moments in this press conference. He tried, I appreciate Nick because he does try to give in-depth answers, but I almost withdrew my question about Paris Campbell when he started talking about a specific route from a game in week 1 of 2020, and there's like the clock's ticking on this half-hour presser, and I'm going, Nick, I don't care about Paris Campbell that much. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ask it. Let's move on.
Yeah, he tends to. It's good that he's using specific examples that you appreciate that. He did that
certainly.
He did that with Gainwell. He's done that with Gainwell with that Aaron Donald chip block, and then catching the ball. It's like the greatest play of Gainwell's career. He's used that one like 8 times. Every time he's asked about Gainwell. Remember in the Rams game?
He was asked about the swagger stuff with C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and he talked about C.J.'s toughness. And I don't know. I think we talked about, I don't want to get too much in it. We talked about it on the last pod with what Howie said about getting their swagger back with some of these free agent acquisitions. We all agree that they're not signing CJ Gardner-Johnson if he's not talented, if he doesn't fit in Vic Fangio's system. But I think the intangibles were very attractive to the Eagles as well.
Yeah, there's no question. And they've brought him up on their own. And he's got all those things. We saw it up close and personal 2 years ago. We know what he can mean to a team.
Any last words on the Sirianni presser?
I don't think so. I think we covered it.
I think we hit most of the major topics there. The rule changes. The kickoff rule, I think, is we already talked about the hip drop in the last one. The kickoff rule is fun.
I was reading about it, and I mean, it's the hip drop. They're saying is still allowed. It's the swivel action.
Okay,
is what's being. But even the
it's hard to not swivel when you're doing.
I know it is, but they said it's gonna be hard to. It's going to be hard to, and it's 15 yards and loss of down, so it's a major infraction.
Yeah,
it's going to be interesting.
I like the kickoff rule. I think it's a fun rule. I do like it. I know some purists. What's the exception?
It's going to eliminate onside kicks, or at least surprise onside kicks.
How often does that come up?
I was there in Dallas opening day, 2000.
How many? Yeah, you're like Howie Roseman bringing up the Brian Westbrook contract from 2006 or whatever it was. Like we're talking about adding 8 to 10 actual plays each game.
I'm just saying I'll miss that play. I'll miss the thread of that play. I love that play.
I get that. And but I think in this case, the reward outweighs that.
I agree. I'll just miss that play.
Okay. Now, I'm fascinated to see what teams do from a strategic standpoint, because not only are you bringing back a kickoff, but it's not even like a traditional kickoff anymore. It's almost like a running play. I think the types of players.
20-yard box, the goal line to the 20. You can have
the landing zone.
Yeah, the landing zone.
It's basically the XFL rule, right?
Yeah. Which the XFL doesn't use anymore.
Yeah, I know. But it's a good rule. I think this will be fun. And it's a trial basis. It's a 1-year thing. So they'll see if it works. And if it doesn't, they'll either get rid of it or they'll alter it a little bit and bring it back. But I'm excited for it. I'm excited to see what special teams coordinators are doing. Michael Clay's in the lab right now trying to cook something up, because I think there are a lot of opportunities to make it a fun play. Yeah, I think the types of players you have returning it are different. I wonder if Jeff Stowland will get involved.
Interesting.
You almost have like blocking scheme.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think we can all agree. I don't know if there's anything everyone who watches this podcast agrees on, but they had to do something, because the kickoff was a dead play. I mean, 99% just out of the end zone. So it's going to add some juice. I'm looking forward to seeing how it looks.
Yeah. If it doesn't work, just give everyone the ball at the 25 and let's just do it.
Yeah.
I think this is, it feels like a last ditch effort to save a play. And I'm all for it, because people's careers get made on special teams. And when you're eliminating this play, there are fewer opportunities for them to make a name for themselves. And special teamers are important. Sometimes they work their way up when they start in special teams.
It's true. Quentin Michael. How come every example I use is from like 20 years ago?
I don't know. We have some really recent ones, and you went Quentin Michael.
Those years stuck with me more. I have a better long-term memory than short-term memory.
Okay, that's good. That's fair. We got anything else here?
I don't think so. It was an interesting day. Definitely,
it was
worth
fun.
the trip.
Yeah, definitely fun. We'll have a bunch of content up on the site soon. Yeah, I love this trip. This is a fun trip. Aside from the weather.
Yeah, I know you're spending the next week at Universal.
I'm not a big theme park guy.
No, you're not going over to Hogwarts?
It's so daunting, like just the crowds.
Yeah, it's not that bad.
It seems like a lot.
Well, anyway, I just wish Jeff Lurie spoke just like maybe 3 times a year. Like, do a state of the team like during training camp, and then talk like after the last game, like that week. Maybe he'll say there's too many unknowns, but once a year. And I have a lot of respect for Jeff Lurie. I think he's one of the best owners in Philadelphia history. May one day end up in the Hall of Fame, but I just wish he spoke more.
Yeah, I'm with you. And he always seems to enjoy it. He tells us how much, I see him at the reception every year. The NFL has like a big reception at this event, and we see him and he tells us how excited he is to talk to us. And every year I go, you feel free to do it more often. It'd be great.
Yeah, he came out actually, and he started before the presser, and he talked about how he spoke about Chris Mortensen, who passed away, and how much he enjoyed his work, and how he was always a fan of sports writers. And Peter Gammons was his favorite, the Boston Globe's great baseball writer, Red Sox writer. So that was, I did not expect that. So
he does appreciate it, and he follows. He knows.
Oh yeah,
everything. He follows it quite a bit.
Yeah, he does.
All right, let's wrap this up. If you enjoy the Eagle Eye Podcast, please do us a favor, rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, click that like button, subscribe there as well. Thank you to Tony House sending us M&Ms. Please, no one else send us M&Ms. We are eyeballs deep in M&Ms, but thank you for that. That was very nice. Any final words, Rube?
No, we'll talk to you guys soon.
All right, take care, everyone. This has been Eagle Eye presented by Nissan.